The cowboy lost everything when his horse vanished. Then it returned with an Apache woman. The cowboy had lived on the edge of the wide plains for most of his life. His ranch sat far from town, surrounded by open land, dry grass, and long dirt paths that only a few people used anymore. Life there was quiet, sometimes painfully so, but it was honest. Every morning he woke before sunrise, brewed weak coffee, and stepped outside to greet the land. The wind, the sky, and his horse were his only constant companions. The horse was more than just an animal to him. It was strong, calm, and loyal. He had raised it from a young age, trained it with patience, and trusted it with his life. Together, they worked the land, checked fences, moved cattle, and traveled miles without a word between them. When the cowboy spoke, the horse seemed to understand. When the cowboy was tired or sad, the horse stayed close, as if listening. The cowboy had lost many things before. Family had drifted away over the years. Friends had moved to cities or passed on. Love had come once briefly and left quietly. What remained was the ranch, the routine, and the horse. That was enough for him, or at least he believed it was. One morning, everything changed. The sun had just begun to rise, painting the sky with soft orange light. The cowboy stepped out of his small house with a saddle over his shoulder. He whistled, the same short tune he always used. Usually, the horse would appear from behind the barn or the nearby trees within seconds. But this time, nothing happened. The cowboy frowned and whistled again, louder, still nothing. He set the saddle down and walked toward the stable. The gate was open. The rope that always held it shut hung loose, swaying gently in the wind. His heart tightened. He walked inside the stable, calling the horse's name. The stall was empty. No hoof sounds, no movement, only silence. At first he told himself there must be a simple explanation. Maybe the horse had wandered out during the night. Maybe it was grazing nearby. He grabbed his hat and walked quickly across the land, scanning the horizon. He called out again and again, his voice growing sharper with worry. Minutes passed, then an hour. There were no clear tracks, no signs of struggle, nothing broken or damaged. The land seemed untouched, as if the horse had simply vanished into thin air. The cowboy mounted an old spare horse that he rarely used and rode out farther. He followed trails he and his horse had traveled countless times. He checked water sources, shaded areas, and familiar resting spots. With every mile, hope slowly faded. By midday, the heat grew heavy. Sweat soaked his shirt, but he kept going. He asked a neighboring rancher if he had seen anything unusual. The man shook his head. Another neighbor suggested wild animals or thieves, but there was no proof of either. As the sun began to sink, the cowboy returned to his ranch alone. That night he sat on the porch, staring into the darkness. The sound of the wind felt louder than usual. The ranch, once full of quiet comfort, now felt empty. He replayed the past days in his mind, searching for something he might have missed. A loose gate, a strange sound, a sign. There was nothing. Sleep did not come easily. The next few days were worse. Without his horse, the cowboy struggled to keep up with his work. Tasks that once took hours now took all day. His body ached more than usual. His temper shortened. He skipped meals and lost interest in small things he once enjoyed, like fixing tools or listening to the radio at night. People from nearby areas heard about the missing horse and offered kind words, but no real answers. Some said animals follow instinct and return when they are ready. Others quietly suggested that maybe it was time for the cowboy to accept change, but acceptance felt impossible. Each morning, he woke up hoping to see the horse standing near the fence, just as it always had. Each morning, the land greeted him with the same painful emptiness. As days turned into weeks, the loss began to affect more than his emotions. The ranch started to fall behind. Cattle wandered farther than they should. Fences broke and stayed broken longer than usual. The cowboy had less energy and fewer reasons to push himself. At night, memories surfaced, old regrets, choices he wished he had made differently. The horse had been there through all of it, steady and reliable, never judging. Losing it felt like losing the one witness to his entire life. One evening, as he sat alone, he finally admitted something he had been avoiding. The horse was not just missing, it was gone. That realization hit harder than anything else. He felt small in the vast land, unsure of his place without the bond that had defined his days. The ranch no longer felt like home. It felt like a reminder of everything slipping through his fingers. The cowboy began to consider leaving. He thought about selling the land, packing what little he owned and starting over somewhere else. The idea frightened him, but staying felt just as painful. Every corner of the ranch carried memories of riding beside the horse, of shared labor and quiet understanding. On the final evening before he planned to make a decision, the sky turned dark with heavy clouds. The air felt strange, charged, as if something unseen was moving through it. The cowboy stood near the fence, watching the horizon one last time. He whispered the horse's name, not expecting an answer. The wind carried the sound away. With a deep breath, he turned back toward the house, unaware that far beyond his sight, the horse was still alive, and that its disappearance was only the beginning of a story far larger than his loss. If you want, I can now expand part 2 in the same style and length. Just tell me. The days after the horse disappeared felt longer than they should have. Morning came, but it did not bring energy. Night fell, but it did not bring rest. The cowboy moved through his routine like someone walking through thick dust, slow and heavy, unsure where he was going. Without his horse, every task became harder. He walked more, carried more, and rested less. His body felt older than it ever had before. Small pains turned into constant aches. His hands, once steady and confident, now shook when he tried to repair broken tools or tie loose rope. The work that once gave him pride now reminded him of what he no longer had. The ranch began to show signs of neglect. Grass grew too tall in some areas and too thin in others. Cattle wandered farther from the main land, and bringing them back took hours of walking under the sun. The fences, once strong and well-kept, started to lean and crack. Each broken plank felt like a quiet failure. The cowboy tried to stay hopeful at first. Every morning he scanned the land carefully. He listened for hoof sounds, even though he knew it was unlikely. Sometimes he thought he heard movement in the distance and rushed toward it, only to find nothing but wind moving through dry grass. People noticed the change in him. A nearby rancher stopped by one afternoon and offered help. He suggested lending a horse or sharing work until things improved. The cowboy thanked him but declined. It was not pride alone that stopped him. Riding another horse felt wrong, like trying to replace something that could not be replaced. Another neighbor suggested that maybe the horse had followed an instinct, perhaps chasing water or safety during the night. The words were meant to comfort, but they only raised more questions. If the horse had chosen to leave, what did that say about everything they had built together? At night, the cowboy sat on his porch, watching the stars appear one by one. He remembered riding beneath those same stars, feeling steady and sure. Now the silence felt too loud. Even the sounds of insects seemed distant. Sleep came in short pieces. Dreams brought images of the horse running freely, always just out of reach. The cowboy would wake up with his heart racing, his mind heavy with loss. Money became another worry. With work slowing down, income dropped. Repairs were delayed. Supplies ran low. The cowboy began making lists of what he could sell and what he could live without. Each item crossed off felt like letting go of a part of his life. He found himself thinking more about the past, about the choices that had led him to this quiet, isolated life, about the people he had pushed away, believing he did not need anyone. The horse had filled that space, offering companionship without words. Now that space felt painfully empty. Some evenings he talked to the land itself, as if it could hear him. He admitted fears he had never spoken aloud. fear of growing old alone, fear of becoming invisible, fear that everything meaningful in his life had already happened. One afternoon, while checking a distant fence, the cowboy noticed tracks he had not seen before. They were faint, almost erased by time, but they caught his attention. He followed them for a short distance, hope rising in his chest. The tracks disappeared. He stood there for a long time, staring at the ground. The disappointment cut deep. It felt cruel for hope to appear only to vanish again. That evening, a storm rolled in. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind picked up speed. The cowboy secured what he could and retreated inside. Rain hit the roof hard, filling the air with sharp sound. He sat at the table, listening, feeling small against the force of nature. As the storm passed, he noticed something strange. The land felt different. Not in a way he could explain clearly, but there was a sense of movement, of change. It was as if something was happening beyond his awareness, something connected to the loss he was struggling to understand. Unbeknownst to him, far from the ranch, the horse was moving through unfamiliar land. It was tired, thinner than before, but driven by something stronger than hunger or fear. It had found someone in need, someone injured and alone. The horse stayed close, guiding and protecting, following instincts older than memory. Back at the ranch, the cowboy made a decision. He could not continue like this forever. He gathered his papers, counted his remaining money, and thought about the future. The idea of leaving the ranch, once unthinkable, now felt like a painful possibility. He imagined handing the land over to someone else, walking away with nothing but memories. The thought left a heavy ache in his chest. The next morning, he began preparing for the possibility of departure. He cleaned the house, sorted tools, and fixed small things he had ignored for weeks. It felt strange, like closing a chapter he was not ready to finish. As he worked, he paused often, listening. Not just with his ears, but with something deeper. A quiet part of him still believed the story was not over. That night, he stood near the fence again, staring into the dark distance. The moon hung low, casting pale light across the land. He whispered the horse's name once more, softer this time, without expectation. Far away, the horse lifted its head, ears alert, as if hearing something carried by the wind. The cowboy did not see this. He only felt a faint shift in his chest, a small, unfamiliar sense that something was moving toward him. Part 2 ends with him standing between loss and change, unaware that his life was about to turn in a way he could never have imagined. If you're ready, I can expand Part 3 next in the same style and length. The morning began like many others, quiet and still. The cowboy woke before sunrise, his body stiff and tired. For a moment, he lay in bed listening to the wind brushing against the walls of the small house. There was a strange feeling in his chest, something between hope and worry, though he could not explain why. He stepped outside with a cup of coffee and looked across the land. The sky was pale, slowly turning gold. The ranch looked the same as it always had, yet something felt different, as if the air itself was waiting. He walked toward the fence, thinking about the choices ahead of him. Leave or stay, sell or hold on. His thoughts were heavy, pressing down on him with every step. Then he heard it. At first it was faint. A sound so familiar that his heart skipped before his mind could catch up. He froze, holding his breath. The sound came again, clearer this time. Hooves. His pulse quickened. He scanned the horizon, eyes searching desperately. For a brief second he was afraid to believe it. Hope had fooled him before, but then he saw movement. A shape appeared in the distance, slow but steady. As it came closer, the cowboy's breath caught in his throat. It was his horse, alive. Walking carefully, thinner than before, dust-covered but unmistakably his. The cowboy ran forward, disbelief pushing him faster than his aching legs should allow. He called out, his voice shaking. The horse lifted its head and let out a soft sound, one the cowboy knew well. Tears blurred his vision, but then he noticed something else. Someone was riding the horse. A woman leaned forward against the horse's neck, her body weak, her movements slow. She looked exhausted, barely able to stay upright. As the horse reached the fence line, the woman slipped sideways and fell gently to the ground. The cowboy rushed to her side. She was an Apache woman, her clothing worn from travel, her face pale with fatigue. Her breathing was shallow but steady. The cowboy knelt beside her, unsure what to do first. His heart raced, torn between joy at seeing his horse and concern for the stranger lying on his land. He removed his hat and placed it under her head to keep her comfortable. He spoke softly, reassuringly, though he did not know if she could hear him. The horse stood nearby, refusing to move, its eyes fixed on the woman. That alone told the cowboy everything he needed to know. Carefully, he lifted the woman and carried her toward the house. It was not easy. She was light from exhaustion but still heavy enough to strain his arms. The horse followed closely, step by step, as if guarding her. Inside the house, the cowboy laid her on the bed and brought water. He dampened a cloth and wiped dust from her face. He checked for injuries without crossing boundaries, careful and respectful. She had scrapes, bruises, signs of long travel, but nothing that seemed life-threatening. He let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. For hours, the woman slept. The cowboy sat nearby, watching, listening to her breathing. His thoughts moved in circles. Where had she come from? How had his horse found her? Why had the horse stayed away for so long? Every so often, the horse stepped closer to the door, as if checking on both of them. As the sun climbed higher, the woman stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, dark and alert despite her weakness. She looked around, confused at first, then focused on the cowboy. They stared at each other in silence. The cowboy raised his hand slightly, a gesture of peace. He spoke calmly, explaining where she was and that she was safe. His voice was gentle, carrying no fear or demand. The woman listened carefully. She tried to sit up but winced. He helped her adjust, placing pillows behind her back. She took a sip of water, then another. Her eyes shifted to the doorway where the horse stood. A soft expression crossed her face. She spoke quietly, her voice rough but steady. She thanked him. She said the horse had saved her life. The cowboy felt a wave of emotion rise in his chest. She explained in broken pauses that she had been separated from her people during a dangerous journey. She had been injured, weak, and alone. The land was unforgiving, the distances long. She believed she would not survive. Then the horse appeared. It had stayed with her, she said. It guided her toward water, stood guard at night, and refused to leave her side. When she was too weak to walk, the horse knelt so she could climb on. It chose this path, not by command but by instinct and loyalty. The cowboy listened, stunned. He looked at the horse, remembering all the years they had spent together. The calm strength, the quiet understanding. He realized that what the horse had done was exactly what it had always done for him, stand steady when someone needed it most. The woman rested while the cowboy prepared food. Simple things, warm broth, bread. She ate slowly, regaining strength with each bite. They spoke little, but the silence felt comfortable, filled with mutual respect. As the day passed, the woman grew stronger. She asked about the ranch, about the land. The cowboy shared pieces of his life, careful not to overwhelm her. He spoke about losing the horse, about how empty the days had felt. She listened without interruption. Later, she told him more of her story. About her people, her connection to the land, and the belief that animals and humans are tied by unseen threads. She said the horse did not get lost. It answered a call. That idea stayed with the cowboy. As evening approached, the sky softened into deep colors. The woman stood with assistance and stepped outside. She breathed in the open air, grounding herself. The horse moved closer to her, brushing its head gently against her shoulder. The cowboy watched, feeling something shift inside him. The loss he had carried for weeks began to change shape. It was no longer just pain. It was purpose. That night they sat near a small fire outside. The woman rested, wrapped in a blanket. The cowboy listened as she spoke about returning to her people once she regained strength. There was gratitude in her voice, but also a sense of independence. He understood. As the fire burned low, the cowboy realized that the horse's disappearance had not been an ending. It had been a journey, one that led back not only with life but with meaning. When the woman finally went inside to sleep, the cowboy stayed outside with the horse. He placed a hand on its neck and whispered thanks. The horse stood quietly, steady as ever. In the darkness, with stars overhead and the land stretching endlessly around him, the cowboy felt something he had not felt in a long time: hope. If you want, I can now expand part 4 in the same style and length. For the first time in many weeks, he did not wake up with worry pressing down on him. He listened for a moment and heard steady breathing from the next room. The woman was resting peacefully. He stepped outside quietly. The air was cool and the land stretched wide and calm. His horse stood near the fence, head lowered, resting. When it noticed him, it lifted its head and stepped closer. The cowboy placed a hand on its neck, feeling warmth and strength beneath his palm. There was no anger, no blame, only understanding. He fed the horse and checked its condition carefully. It was thin, tired, but strong. Whatever journey it had taken had tested it deeply, yet it had returned with purpose. The cowboy felt respect grow even deeper in his heart. When he returned inside, the woman was awake, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. She looked stronger than the day before, though still weak. He greeted her gently and asked how she felt. She nodded and said she felt better, thanks to rest and care. He prepared a simple breakfast and helped her eat. They spoke slowly, choosing words carefully. There was no rush between them. Each sentence carried weight. As the day moved forward, the woman shared more of her story. She spoke of her people, her connection to wide open land, and the lessons passed down through generations. She explained how the land was not owned but respected, how animals were not tools but partners in life. The cowboy listened closely. Much of what she said felt familiar, even if he had never heard it spoken that way before. He had always felt a quiet bond with the land and his horse, but he had never put words to it. She explained how she had been traveling with others when circumstances forced them apart. The terrain had been harsh. She had tried to move forward alone, but her strength failed her. When the horse appeared, she thought at first it was a vision born of exhaustion, but the horse stayed. It guided her, protected her, and led her toward safety. She said she believed the horse was sent to her, not by chance but by connection. The cowboy thought about the night the horse disappeared, the open gate, the stillness. He had assumed loss, but perhaps it had been a calling. Later in the day, the woman asked to step outside. The cowboy supported her as she walked slowly across the yard. Each step was careful but determined. She closed her eyes and placed her hand on the ground, breathing deeply. The cowboy stood nearby, giving her space. When she opened her eyes, she smiled faintly. She said the land was kind here, strong, honest. She thanked him again, not just for shelter, but for respect. As the afternoon passed, neighbors stopped by after noticing the horse had returned. They came with surprise, curiosity, and quiet relief. The cowboy introduced the woman simply, without explanation. He did not share her story without her consent. The neighbors were polite and welcoming. Some offered supplies, others offered help. There was a sense that something important had happened, even if no one fully understood it. The woman watched these interactions closely. Later, she told the cowboy she saw goodness in the people around him. That kindness, even simple kindness, mattered. As evening approached, the woman spoke of returning to her people. She said she needed to finish her journey, to let them know she was safe. Her voice carried strength now, though there was sadness as well. The cowboy felt a quiet ache at the thought of her leaving. Her presence had changed the space around him. The ranch no longer felt empty. It felt awake. He told her he would help in any way he could. That night, they sat near the fire again. The flames moved gently, casting warm light on their faces. The woman spoke of lessons learned through hardship. The cowboy spoke of years spent alone, believing that solitude was strength. They realized they had both survived by trusting what was steady and true. The woman told him that sometimes loss opens paths we never would have chosen but need all the same. She said the horse understood that. The cowboy looked at the horse standing nearby, calm and alert. He believed her. Before sleeping, the woman stood and faced the open land. She whispered words the cowboy did not understand, but he felt their meaning: gratitude, farewell, respect. The next morning she was stronger still. She prepared herself to leave. The cowboy packed supplies, food, and water. He offered to guide her part of the way, but she gently refused. She said the rest of the journey was hers to walk. Before she left, she placed her hand over her heart and thanked him once more. She said their paths had crossed for a reason, and that reason would stay with both of them. She approached the horse and rested her forehead against its neck. For a long moment, neither moved. Then she stepped back. The horse watched her go, calm and accepting. The cowboy stood beside the fence, watching until she disappeared into the distance. He felt sadness, but not emptiness. What remained was something stronger. When he turned back toward the ranch, the land looked different, not because it had changed, but because he had. The loss that once broke him had brought connection, purpose, and renewal. He understood now that what he feared losing forever had returned with meaning greater than he imagined. As he walked back toward the house, the horse followed at his side. Together they stepped into a future shaped not by what was taken away, but by what had been given back. If you want, I can now expand part 5, the final part, to complete the story. The ranch felt quieter after the woman left, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. It was not empty or heavy. It felt settled, like land after rain. The cowboy stood by the fence for a long time, watching the direction she had gone, even after she was no longer visible. He did not feel regret. He felt respect. When he finally turned back, his horse walked beside him, matching his pace. That simple presence meant more than words ever could. The cowboy reached out and rested his hand on the horse's neck, feeling steady warmth and calm strength. He knew deep inside that nothing had truly been lost. Life did not change all at once. There was no sudden miracle or easy solution, but something inside the cowboy had shifted, and that made all the difference. The next morning he woke with purpose. He rose early, fed the horse, and began repairing the fence that had been leaning for weeks. His movements were slower than they once were, but they were sure. He worked steadily, taking breaks when needed, listening to his body instead of fighting it. As days passed, he noticed small improvements. The cattle stayed closer. The land responded to care. Even the house felt warmer, as if it recognized his renewed attention. Word spread quietly among nearby ranches about what had happened, not in detail and not with drama. Just enough for people to understand that the cowboy was someone who acted with kindness and respect. Neighbors stopped by more often. They brought supplies, shared meals, and offered help without pity. The cowboy accepted this time. He learned that strength did not always mean standing alone. Sometimes in the evenings he thought about the woman. He hoped she had reached her people safely. He trusted that she had. There was no longing that hurt, only a calm sense of connection. Their paths had crossed, and that was enough. The horse, too, seemed changed. It was calmer, yet more alert. It stayed close, not out of fear, but out of choice. The cowboy noticed that when he worked, the horse watched him carefully, as if checking that he was all right. They rode together again after some time had passed. The first ride was slow and careful. The cowboy did not push the horse. He let it set the pace. The land stretched before them, familiar yet new. As they moved, the cowboy felt something he had not felt in years: trust. Not just in the horse, but in life itself. Seasons began to change. The heat softened. The sky widened. The ranch found its rhythm again. There were still hard days, still moments of doubt, but the cowboy no longer felt broken by them. One afternoon, while resting under a tree, he thought back to the moment he had believed everything was over. The missing horse, the silence, the loneliness. He realized now that what he had thought was an ending had been a turning point. Loss had opened his eyes. He had learned that connection could arrive without warning and leave without taking everything with it. He had learned that purpose could return in unexpected forms. He had learned that giving care freely did not make a person weak, it made them whole. As the sun lowered, he guided the horse back toward the ranch. The sky glowed with warm colors and the land seemed to breathe with him. That evening he sat on the porch, just as he had many times before. But now, when the wind moved through the grass, it felt like a conversation instead of an echo. He smiled quietly. Life had not given him back what he lost in the way he expected. It had given him something deeper, understanding. The cowboy no longer feared being alone. He knew that even in silence there were bonds that did not break, bonds with the land, with animals, with people who passed through his life and left their mark. As darkness settled and stars filled the sky, the horse stood nearby, steady and calm. The cowboy tipped his hat toward the open land in quiet thanks. The story did not end with loss. It ended with return.